The year was 1991. Donald Trump sat alone in his penthouse office, staring at papers that would shock the world if they ever saw daylight. The man the media called a billionaire was broke. Not just struggling, completely, utterly broke. His empire was crumbling faster than a house of cards in a hurricane. But here's what nobody knew then, and what most people still don't understand today. This moment of complete destruction would become the foundation for one of the most controversial wealth comebacks in American history. You think you know Donald Trump's story. The golden towers, the private jets, the endless headlines. But what if everything you believed about how he built his fortune was wrong? What if the real secrets to his wealth weren't what the magazines wrote about, but something much darker, much more desperate, and yet much more applicable to your own life than you ever imagined? By the time you finish this story, you'll understand not just how Trump really built his wealth, but how those same principles, stripped of the controversy and adapted for regular people, could transform your own financial future. Because the truth about building wealth isn't pretty, it isn't simple, and it definitely isn't what they teach you in school. This is the story they never told you. The story of failure, desperation, reinvention, and the cold, hard strategies that really build fortunes in America. It starts with a young man who had everything to lose and everything to prove. Queens, New York, 1968. 22-year-old Donald Trump walked through the halls of his father's real estate office, watching deals being made that would generate millions. But there was something eating at him, something that would drive every decision he made for the next 50 years. Fred Trump was already a millionaire, building apartments across Queens and Brooklyn. His empire was solid, respectable, profitable. But Donald saw something his father couldn't see, or maybe refused to see. Fred's wealth had a ceiling. It was limited by geography, by class, by the unspoken rules of where people like them belonged. Donald's friends from Wharton Business School were talking about Manhattan. The gleaming towers, the power lunches, the deals that made headlines. While his father was content building middle-class housing in the outer boroughs, Donald was staring across the river at Manhattan's skyline with hunger in his eyes. But here's what nobody talks about: the weight of expectation that pressed down on Donald's shoulders every single day. His father had built something real, something lasting. The question that haunted Donald wasn't whether he could match his father's success. It was whether he could surpass it without destroying everything Fred had worked for. The first lesson in building wealth isn't about making money. It's about understanding what you're willing to risk and what you're willing to lose to get what you want. And in 1971, Donald Trump was about to find out exactly how much he was willing to sacrifice.
Manhattan, 1974. The city was dying. Crime was exploding, businesses were fleeing, and real estate prices were in free fall. Most investors were running away from Manhattan as fast as they could. Donald Trump saw opportunity where others saw disaster. He'd been studying a property for months, the old Commodore Hotel next to Grand Central Station. It was a rotting, rat-infested mess that nobody wanted. The owner was desperate to sell. The city was desperate for tax revenue. And Donald? Donald was desperate to prove he belonged in Manhattan. But here's the secret nobody talks about. Trump didn't have the money to buy the Commodore Hotel. He didn't even come close. What he had was something more powerful: the ability to structure a deal so complex, so layered with other people's money and government incentives, that he could control a $100 million project with almost none of his own cash. He convinced the city to give him a 40-year tax abatement worth millions. He partnered with Hyatt Hotels, who brought their management expertise and credibility. He borrowed against future profits that didn't exist yet. And somehow, through a maze of loans, partnerships, and government deals, he transformed a dying hotel into the Grand Hyatt, his first Manhattan success. The renovation took 3 years. 3 years of constant crisis, where every week brought a new problem that could have destroyed everything. Contractors threatening to walk off the job. Loans coming due with no money to pay them. City officials questioning whether this young guy from Queens could actually pull off what he promised. But Trump had learned something that would define every deal he made for the rest of his life. When you don't have money, you need something more valuable: credibility, connections, and the absolute refusal to give up when everything goes wrong. The Grand Hyatt opened in 1980 to rave reviews. Suddenly, Donald Trump wasn't just Fred Trump's son anymore. He was the young hotshot who'd bet everything on Manhattan and won. But winning his first bet only made him hungrier for bigger gambles. By 1983, Donald Trump had a problem most people would kill for: too much success too fast. The Grand Hyatt was printing money. His next project, Trump Tower, was rising into the Manhattan sky like a golden monument to his ambitions. Every newspaper in the city was writing about the young real estate genius who was reshaping Manhattan. But success was creating a new kind of pressure. Every deal had to be bigger than the last one. Every building had to be more spectacular. Every headline had to scream louder. Trump Tower wasn't just a building, it was a statement. 58 floors of black glass and bronze, with a 3-story waterfall in the lobby and the most expensive retail space in the world. Trump didn't just put his name on the building. He made his name the most important thing about it. The penthouse apartment he built for himself on the top 3 floors became legendary. Gold leaf everywhere, marble from Italy, a living room bigger than most people's entire homes. But here's what the magazines didn't understand when they wrote their breathless profiles. The apartment wasn't just where Trump lived. It was his most important business tool. Every major deal Trump made in the 1980s was closed in that apartment. Bankers, investors, politicians, celebrities, they all came to see the golden palace in the sky. And when they saw how Trump lived, how he presented himself, they believed he was exactly as successful as he appeared to be. This was Trump's second major wealth-building principle. Perception creates reality. If people believe you're successful, they'll give you the tools to become actually successful. The apartment was an investment in his image, and his image was becoming his most valuable asset. But images can be expensive to maintain. And by 1987, Trump was starting to learn that building an empire on borrowed money and borrowed credibility has a price that eventually comes due. The late 1980s in New York City were intoxicating. The economy was booming. Real estate prices were exploding. Everyone with money was making more money, and everyone without money was figuring out how to get some. Trump was riding higher than he'd ever imagined. Trump Tower led to Trump Plaza. Trump Plaza led to Trump Park. Every project was bigger, flashier, more expensive than the last. The banks were throwing money at him faster than he could spend it. But something was changing in Trump during these years. The careful deal-making of the Grand Hyatt was being replaced by something more reckless, more desperate. He wasn't just building buildings anymore, he was building a persona that required constant feeding. He bought the New Jersey Generals football team and immediately began talking about moving the entire league to compete directly with the NFL. He opened Trump Castle Casino in Atlantic City, then Trump Taj Mahal, borrowing hundreds of millions to build what he called the 8th wonder of the world. Each deal required more leverage than the last. Each loan required personal guarantees that put everything he owned at risk. The banks kept lending because Trump's name had become a brand, and the brand was worth hundreds of millions in marketing value. But brands built on debt and hype have a way of collapsing when the underlying economics don't work. And by 1989, the underlying economics of Trump's empire were becoming impossible to ignore. The casinos were losing money every month. The real estate market was softening. Interest rates were rising, making his floating rate loans more expensive every quarter. And Trump was starting to realize that he'd built his fortune on a foundation that was much less solid than it appeared. The man who'd mastered the art of using other people's money was about to learn what happens when other people want their money back. October 1990. Trump sat in his lawyer's office, reviewing documents that detailed his complete financial destruction. The numbers were staggering, almost impossible to believe. Personal debt, $975 million. Business debt, $3.4 billion. Monthly interest payments, $50 million. The empire he'd spent 20 years building was collapsing in real time. The banks were circling like vultures. The bondholders were demanding their money. The press, which had built him up as a golden boy genius, was now competing to write the most brutal obituary for his career. Trump's shuttle, his airline, was hemorrhaging cash. The casinos were losing money so fast that he couldn't make the interest payments on the bonds he'd issued to build them. His yacht, his helicopter, his fleet of cars, everything was mortgaged to the hilt. But here's what makes this story different from every other tale of spectacular financial collapse. Trump didn't run. He didn't declare bankruptcy and disappear. He didn't blame others and walk away from his debts. Instead, he did something that would define the rest of his career and teach a lesson about wealth building that most people never learn. He negotiated his way out of complete destruction. The banks had a problem. If they foreclosed on Trump's properties, they'd have to take massive losses. The real estate market was terrible, and nobody else had Trump's name recognition to market the properties. As much as they hated to admit it, they needed Trump almost as much as Trump needed them. So Trump made a deal that saved his life. He gave up control of most of his properties in exchange for a monthly allowance and the right to keep his name on the buildings. The banks would own the buildings, but Trump would still be Trump. It was humiliating. It was desperate. It was also brilliant. Because while everyone was writing Trump's obituary, he was learning the most valuable lesson of his entire career. Your name, your reputation, and your ability to make deals are worth more than any building or bank account. 1994, 4 years after his financial collapse, Trump was living on a $450,000 monthly allowance from his creditors, watching other people run the empire he'd built. Every newspaper story about him mentioned his failures. Every business meeting began with questions about his debts. Most people would have been broken by this experience. Trump used it as fuel. He spent those 4 years doing something he'd never had time for when he was building his empire. He studied. He read every book about negotiation, about deal-making, about comeback stories. He analyzed his mistakes with the cold precision of a surgeon. The casinos had failed because he built them during a recession with borrowed money at terrible interest rates. The airline had failed because he tried to compete with established carriers without understanding the industry. The yacht and the helicopter and the lifestyle expenses had been ego purchases that generated no income. But the real estate, the core Trump Organization properties, those were still valuable. Those were still generating income. And Trump's name on those buildings was still worth something, even if he didn't own them anymore. So Trump made a decision that would define the rest of his career. Instead of trying to rebuild his old empire, he would build something new. Something based on the one asset that couldn't be taken away from him, his ability to negotiate and his personal brand. He started small. Consulting deals where companies paid him to put his name on their projects. Management contracts where he ran other people's properties for a fee. Licensing deals where his name added value to products he didn't manufacture. Each deal taught him something new about the power of branding. Each success gave him a little more credibility for the next deal. Each month he was earning more money and paying down more debt. By 1995, Trump was cash flow positive for the first time in 5 years. By 1996 he was starting to buy new properties again. By 1997 he was back on the Forbes list of wealthy Americans. But the most important thing Trump learned during his resurrection wasn't about money or real estate or negotiation. It was about resilience. About the psychological difference between people who get knocked down and stay down, and people who get knocked down and come back stronger. By 2023, Trump was successful again, but he was restless. The real estate business had made him wealthy, but it hadn't made him famous in the way he remembered from the 1980s. He was known in New York, known in business circles, but he wasn't a household name anymore. Then Mark Burnett, a television producer, approached him with an idea that seemed almost ridiculous. A reality show where business contestants would compete for a job working for Trump. They would live together, complete business challenges, and every week Trump would fire someone with his now famous phrase, "You're fired." Most successful businessmen would have said no. Television was beneath them. Reality TV was trashy, temporary, not serious. Trump saw something different. The chance to rebuild his brand on a scale that no real estate deal could match. The Apprentice premiered in January 2004 and became an instant cultural phenomenon. Suddenly, Donald Trump wasn't just a real estate developer. He was America's idea of what a successful businessman looked like. Confident, decisive, unforgiving of failure, living a lifestyle that millions of people could only dream about. The show ran for 14 seasons and made Trump more famous than any building ever could. But more importantly, it generated revenue streams that Trump had never imagined. Licensing deals, speaking engagements, product endorsements, all because television had made him not just wealthy but iconic. The TV show taught Trump the most valuable lesson about modern wealth building. In the information age, your personal brand is your most valuable asset. Buildings can be foreclosed. Businesses can fail. But a strong personal brand, properly managed, can generate income for decades. Every episode of The Apprentice was essentially a 42-minute commercial for the Trump brand. Every catchphrase, every dramatic firing, every glimpse of his golden apartment was building value that couldn't be measured in traditional accounting terms. By 2015, when Trump was considering running for president, his name was worth an estimated $3 billion in brand value. Not bad for a guy who'd been bankrupt just 20 years earlier. At age 69, when most successful businessmen are thinking about retirement and legacy, Trump made the most audacious bet of his entire career. He decided to run for president of the United States. Everyone said he couldn't win. The political establishment dismissed him. The media treated his campaign as a publicity stunt. Even people in his own Republican Party thought he was damaging the brand he'd spent decades building. But Trump understood something that traditional politicians didn't. The same principles that had built his business empire could be applied to politics. Branding, negotiation, media manipulation, the strategic use of controversy to generate attention. These weren't just business skills. They were power skills. His campaign broke every rule of traditional politics. Instead of careful, focus-grouped messaging, he said whatever came to mind. Instead of trying to appeal to everyone, he polarized people deliberately. Instead of hiding his wealth, he flaunted it as proof that he couldn't be bought. And somehow, against all odds and predictions, it worked. Winning the presidency gave Trump something that no amount of money could buy: ultimate leverage. As president, every decision he made could impact global markets. Every tweet could move stock prices. Every policy announcement could create or destroy billions in value. But more than that, becoming president validated every principle Trump had used to build wealth throughout his career. The power of branding, the importance of negotiation, the value of being underestimated by your competitors, all of these had taken him from the real estate business in Queens to the most powerful position in the world. The presidency wasn't the end of Trump's wealth-building journey. It was the ultimate expression of everything he'd learned about how power and money really work in America. So what can you learn from Trump's journey? What principles from his story can you apply to your own wealth building, without the controversy, without the politics, without the personal drama? The first secret is leverage, not just financial leverage but leverage of every kind. Trump never used his own money when he could use someone else's. He never did work himself when he could pay others to do it. He never built from scratch when he could buy, improve, and rebrand. You don't need millions to apply this principle. You can leverage other people's time by hiring virtual assistants. You can leverage other people's audiences by guest posting and podcasting. You can leverage other people's money through business loans, investor partnerships, or even credit cards used strategically for business purposes. The second secret is branding yourself, not just your business. Trump understood that people don't just buy products. They buy the story of the person behind the products. His name became more valuable than any individual property he owned. In today's economy, this is even more important. Your personal brand on social media, your reputation in your industry, your network of relationships. These assets can generate income long after any particular job or business ends. The third secret is resilience in the face of failure. Trump's bankruptcy in the 1990s wasn't just a setback. It was a complete destruction of everything he'd built. But instead of disappearing, he used the failure as education. He learned what worked, what didn't, and how to structure deals better in the future. Most people avoid failure so desperately that they never take risks big enough to create real wealth. Trump's story shows that intelligent failure, failure that teaches you something valuable, is often the fastest path to success. The fourth secret from Trump's journey is diversification of income streams. Real estate, television, licensing, branding, consulting, politics. Trump never relied on just one source of income. When one area struggled, others could carry the load. You can apply this same principle on a smaller scale. If you're employed, develop side businesses. If you have one business, create multiple revenue streams within it. If you're an expert in one area, find ways to monetize that expertise through consulting, courses, speaking, writing. The fifth secret is understanding that wealth isn't just about money, it's about options. Trump's wealth gave him the option to run for president, the option to take risks that others couldn't afford, the option to fail and try again. Every dollar you save, every skill you develop, every relationship you build is creating options for your future. The goal isn't just to accumulate money in a bank account. The goal is to create enough resources, financial, intellectual, and social, that you can pursue opportunities others can't. But here's the most important lesson from Trump's story. Wealth building is psychological as much as it is financial. The difference between people who build lasting wealth and people who stay financially stuck isn't usually intelligence or education or even opportunity. It's the willingness to take calculated risks, to learn from failures, to negotiate aggressively for what you want, and to never, ever give up when things get difficult. Trump's story is controversial, complex, and often contradictory. But stripped down to its essential elements, it's the story of someone who refused to accept limitations, who turned failures into fuel, and who understood that in America, your circumstances don't define your potential, your decisions do. So how do you take these principles and apply them to your own life, starting today? First, audit your current situation with brutal honesty. What assets do you have? What skills? What relationships? What opportunities are you not taking advantage of? Trump's comeback started with a clear-eyed assessment of what he had left after losing everything. Second, identify your Manhattan, the bigger game you want to play. Trump could have stayed in Queens building apartments like his father. Instead, he chose Manhattan because it offered unlimited upside. What's the bigger version of what you're currently doing? Third, start building your personal brand immediately. In today's economy, obscurity is your biggest enemy. Whether it's LinkedIn, Twitter, YouTube, podcasting, or writing, find a way to share your expertise and build an audience around your name and reputation. Fourth, learn to structure deals that give you upside without requiring all of your own capital. This might mean finding business partners, learning about real estate investment with minimal down payments, or creating businesses that scale without massive upfront costs. Fifth, embrace intelligent failure. Take risks that could significantly improve your situation, but structure them so that failure won't destroy you. Trump's biggest failures taught him lessons that made his biggest successes possible. The path to wealth in America hasn't changed as much as people think. It still requires vision, persistence, strategic thinking, and the willingness to be uncomfortable while you're building something bigger than your current circumstances. Trump's story shows that it doesn't matter where you start. It matters where you're determined to finish. It doesn't matter how many times you get knocked down. It matters how quickly you get back up and what you learn from the experience. Your empire doesn't have to be built on real estate or television or politics. It can be built on technology, on services, on products, on content creation, on solving problems that other people can't or won't solve. But whatever you build it on, the fundamental principles remain the same. Leverage other people's resources, build your personal brand, diversify your income streams, learn from failures, and never accept that your current situation is permanent. The question isn't whether you can build wealth in America. The question is whether you're willing to do what wealth building actually requires. Not just the work, but the psychology, the risk-taking, the persistence through setbacks, and the long-term thinking that separates people who dream about wealth from people who actually build it. Trump's story is proof that in America, with the right strategy and the right mindset, anyone can build an empire. The empire you build might look completely different from his, but the principles that create it will be remarkably similar. The only question left is, what empire are you going to build? Remember, this story isn't about politics or controversy. It's about understanding the real principles that create wealth in America, regardless of who uses them or how they use them. Your character, your choices, and your specific methods will define whether these principles create something positive or negative in your life and in the world around you. The power is in the principles. How you use that power is up to you. If you found this breakdown eye-opening, hit that like button, share this with someone who needs to hear it, and subscribe so you don't miss the next strategy-packed video. Remember, investing in yourself is the ultimate power move.